There are several universal laws guiding the existence of mankind. Some say there's 7, others might say 12. Regardless of any of the universal laws you may be looking at that affect human existence anywhere in the world, you will find the law of polarity. Almost all the laws are tied to this law, and none supersedes this law. This law dictates everything exists in twos, different manifestations of the same thing. In other words, everything is one thing that is expressed into two things. These two things are often seen as opposites. These opposites are identical in nature, but different in degrees or levels. By definition, polarity means everything has to be dual, two extremes of the same thing. That gives an illusion of opposites. Stay with me till the end of this video, and you will see why this law is critical to the manifestations of anything you want in your life. To this point, let's take a quick look at the concept of the rich and poor and see how they are actually the same thing, masquerading as opposites. For example, if I mentioned an amount to you, let's say $20 million, and ask you to place it on a line labeled rich and poor, under which line are you likely to place the amount? Is it under the poor column? Or is it on the rich side? Or even right there in the middle? Based on where we are in our lives, I believe the answer would easily be on the rich side of the column. So what if I told you about a billionaire who was worth $10 billion, and for whatever reason his fortunes dwindled and all he has left in the bank is $20 million, the same amount we're experimenting with? Using the same skill, would you likely leave that $20 million on the rich side of the column, or are you likely to switch it to the poor side of the column? After all, it's the same amount, but our perception may have shifted a little bit, causing us to move that amount up and down the column of the rich and the poor. This is an example of the illusion of the law of polarity. We think two things are opposites, but they are all part of the same thing. Let's take a look at temperature as another example, having two extremes of hot and cold. In the winter, when the weather is extremely cold, we turn on the thermostat in an attempt to increase the temperature from cold to hot. The question is, at what point exactly does the temperature change from cold to hot, enough for the room to warm up? Nobody really knows this because there's a point where both extremes meet, causing one to become dominant over the other. So you see, these concepts were never different. They were never opposites. How could they be? Only the illusions from our minds makes us think that they are. Otherwise, how would you explain the concept of night and day, darkness and light? Does anyone know the exact time when daylight turns to night and when night becomes day? Of course not. That's because they're part of the same thing. The differences or opposites that we see are nothing but an illusion. Why is this even important? Why are we talking about this? The understanding of this law might hold the key to some of the most precious things that have been eluding you for some time. The lack of understanding is one of the reasons why we think that the law of attraction doesn't work for us. We typically see two extreme situations in our lives, not as one thing, but as two separate entities. Let's use someone who is broke as an example. He can't pay his bills or do any other important thing in his life. Obviously, this is a frustrating experience, one not meant to play with. At this point in that person's life, all you want to do is experience abundance. This is the polar extreme of the situation you're experiencing at that moment. You would obviously rather have $1 million instead of being broke. If you battle with being broke, more than likely you will not be okay with it. You don't have to like it, and that's perfectly fine, but you have to be okay with it. You have to accept it when it comes. Our fascination for summer does not mean that we have to not accept winter when it comes. We know it's part of a cycle. You have to be okay with yourself when you have a lot and when you have very little. They're all part of the same thing. The suffering you feel from not achieving or getting what you want is causing an emotional or mental blockage. This blockage prevents the law of attraction from manifesting in your life. Therefore, it is imperative to accept the state you're in. You cannot dismiss a condition just because you don't want it or like it. Our fixation on only what we want, neglecting our current state, which is the polar opposite of what we want, causes us to suffer and leaves very little room for gratitude. A woman desperate to be in a loving relationship and possibly a marriage would look at herself as having all the right qualities. She's beautiful, successful, smart, and yet no man. Naturally, her mind would be made up that she would never be okay until this particular thing is taken care of. The secret is she has to be okay with herself, being single first, before the law of attraction can happen for her. Not being okay causes her to suffer, and that suffering results in a blockage. As difficult as this may appear, this law is applicable to every area of life. Inside of a fat-looking person lies a skinny person. You must be okay with yourself in either conditions. Does a person who is perceived as bad change suddenly when he does good deeds? And conversely, someone who is perceived as good all of a sudden does something bad. Does the status change from good to bad? The truth is, nothing is absolute. Good can come from bad, and bad can come from good. The absolute opposites that we see is an illusion based on our limited perception. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, including your story. You can't accept one and ignore the other. Society has made us obsessed with one half, which is the cause of our suffering. Therefore, remember that juicy story you heard from your friend? Yes, the other half may be missing. So before you pass your judgment, always remember the falsehood and the truth are both part of the same story. No difference, just an illusion. The law of polarity makes it clear that failure and success are not separate entities, but a part of each other. How can you finish if you don't start? Without heads, you cannot have tail, as they are both part of the same coin. Life and death are not separate entities. Humans are the only beings on this planet that are obsessed about death, so much so that they forget to live. Every other creature on this planet seems to be more at peace with the concept of living and dying more than we are. Truth is, you can never die if you've never lived. And conversely, you can never live if you have never died. This statement will mean different things to different people. However, it's conversation for another day. But you get the overall point. Life and death are not opposites. They are part of the same thing. In conclusion, if I were to ask you, what is the opposite of me? I guess there's much. A lot of folks would say you. But the question is, how did you come to your conclusion? Did you compare me to you based on race, occupation, education, marital status? How did you know that the opposite of me is you? The closest thing that would help us come to something close to that conclusion is consciousness. How are we in consciousness? Not in physicality, but in consciousness. The truth is that in consciousness, I am you and you are me. We are one, a part of the universe. There is no separation. We are one body. The separation and the opposites that we see are all part of an illusion. There is no difference between me and you. We are one in consciousness. You are important, extremely important to the planet. You are valuable. You are a beautiful expression of life, powerful beyond words. What you want wants you. If I have made you think so far, you're welcome. Thanks for hanging out with me throughout the video, and thank you for watching.